Okay, so I'm Roger FitzGerald from ADP. I'm going to talk about concrete elegance in relation to the Forum project in Southend. What's unusual or even unique about the Forum project is that it's this unique collaboration between three client organisations: Southend Borough Council, University of Essex and South Essex College. And they've come together to provide a contemporary, integrated municipal and academic library. And there's also particular accommodation for the university and the college. Southend itself is located in the Thames Gateway, and there are policies to encourage regeneration and growth. The site itself, Southend, is all about the sea frontage, which runs roughly east-west, and running north-south is the High Street, which leads from railway stations down to the famous pier. And the site itself, in red on the plan, is just off the High Street. One of the problems in Southend is that the High Street is fine, but the area behind the High Street is in need of regeneration. So there's the site in a bit more detail. The Municipal Library is actually off the plan to the north, so that's roughly 5 or 10 minutes walk from the centre of Southend, so not ideal. The university, which is primarily located in Colchester, has accommodation with the Gateway building and also student study bedrooms, and the college has the Looker Road building, LSC funded big landmark building. So Elmer Square potentially is going to be the focal point of a new academic municipal area. Previously occupied by a multi-storey car park, which was pretty unsightly, so that was demolished to create the site. So our involvement with the project began with an expression of interest through the ODU notice procedure, and we were shortlisted with, I think, about 8 other architects to submit our more detailed design proposals and methodology. From the beginning, the way we've tackled the site is to try and put as much building to the western side of the site as possible, fronting onto Elmer Avenue, so that we're creating the sort of street scene and creating as much space as possible for public realm in front of the building. And to the right of the trees shown there, there's potential for future development which will further define that new urban space. And the way we approached the accommodation was to in effect layer the facilities so that the more private accommodation would be on the Elmer Avenue frontage facing towards the residential properties, and the more open facilities where we want space to flow from inside to outside, people to feel they can come easily into the building, is on the eastern side of the building. In a way, we applied a similar sort of layering to the cross-section. So the ground floor has the more publicly accessible facilities. And then you move up to the first floor, which is where there's the shared library, and then moving up through the building, it becomes more and more private with the university and the college accommodation. The college didn't want as much accommodation as the university, so we took advantage of that to pile as much accommodation onto the eastern side as possible. So we have a 4-storey building facing into the public square, the more sort of civic presence. And then on the other side, the western side, we used a 2-storey high vertical concrete fin at first and second floor levels to bring the scale down and relate it to the 2 stories of the terraced housing opposite. Now I think with the fact that we have 3 different client users of the building, we can anticipate this building is going to change in the future. So in effect what we've done is to provide reasonably deep plan, about 10 or 11 metres deep floor plates, which are flexible and which can accommodate future change. Those will be naturally lit from the perimeter and also get secondary light from a light bulb which runs up the middle of the building. That also contains the main staircase, which is quite a ceremonial grand staircase to take you up through the building to the different levels. Because each level in effect is a mini entrance in itself. There's the entrance to the library at first floor, entrance to the university at second floor, and then the entrance to the college at third floor, all within the overall building. So this was an early diagram which shows the different uses of the building. So the accommodation requirements included a 200-seat lecture theatre, which we put at the south end of the building in a sort of curvaceous form, that's shaded green. And then between that and the public realm, shaded red, is a cafe, which is quite prominent in terms of its location, visible from the high street. Orange is the focal point gallery. Green is the children's library, and blue the entrance. So consistent with this idea of all those important public facilities being easy to get to from the public square. And then on the western side, as I mentioned earlier, the more offices and seminar rooms, slightly more introverted spaces. Various cross-sections through the building. So at the top we have a cross-section which first of all makes that point that I mentioned earlier about the scale and that device of using the vertical fin at first and second floor levels, which relates, as the two arrows indicate, to the scale of the terraced housing on the left. And then on the right-hand side of that cross-section, the dotted arrow lines, they indicate the sort of transparency and openness that we're trying to create, including at first and second floor levels, where we're looking at having bay windows and balconies that push out from the building and engage with the public square. And then we have a long section through the building which shows a grand staircase moving up through the atrium, and each of those flights relating to a shear wall which will be in situ concrete, so we're relating the structure to the circulation movement. And shaded grey, you can see the lecture theatre stepping into the site, so you'd enter it at the upper level and then step down into the lecture theatre. And that's shown also in the bottom drawing, which is a cross-section through the lecture theatre. This is an early concept drawing, really exploring this issue of scale, because the building has to make this quite major transition from the scale of Elmer Avenue, 2-storey high, to a much more civic scale on the other side. And this is really examining whether the devices described would work and achieve what we wanted. And then this is one of the very first sketches of the public square side of the building. Ground level, the idea of these sort of shards which come out from the building and help sort of divert the pedestrian flow into the building to help that openness. First and second floor levels, the idea of the bay windows, the balconies pushing out into the public square. On the right-hand side, you can also see the public screen for major events, which is a focal point of the square. And then the top floor was seen as quite a heavy element, and that was partly inspired by looking at the pier, which is a very heavy upper element supported on some quite light structure below it, and that partly inspired this elevational treatment. It was also triggered by the fact that the college in these early stages was looking to put art studios on the top floor, and the thought there was that they would be top lit, naturally lit, with just very small windows in the facade. And the principle also of this was about folded planes, which is a sort of recurring theme in the composition of the building, which is shown also by the physical model which we submitted. You can see there the glazing to the central light well, the roof lights that I just mentioned to the top floor, and the various other features that I've mentioned. And then we also provided a computer-generated image, which actually is remarkably similar to how the building has ended up. Perhaps the only difference is that the building as built has actually got some structure to support it. The image there doesn't show very much at ground floor level to actually support the building. So then we were fortunate enough to win the project, and as the scheme then developed through the more detailed design stage, really the principles of what we'd set out at the beginning continued as the design progressed. The openness to the square, the servicing was incorporated at the north end of the building, and on the left-hand side of that plan you can just see a very slight break in the terrace, which is where, as is common with Edwardian and Victorian terraces, you get a little narrow alleyway that allows you to come through to the back of the terrace. And we wanted to replicate that break in the grid in our building. So the vertical solar shading, which I mentioned. Those fins relate to the fins of the terraced houses, and they also relate to that break in the geometry with a smaller grid corresponding with that passageway, and you'll see the impact of that in some of the photographs. But we thought it was quite an important way of relating the building to the urban grain. And then a long section which reinforces the principles of these grand staircase flights leading up through the building, and the sense of arrival we are wanting to create at each floor level. And you can see also the way in which the lecture theatre is dug into the ground. And so the scheme developed with more detailed plans. You can see there the break in the grid coming through from that little passageway through the building and out on the eastern side. And centred on that is a fin wall, which is the main signposting to divert people into the main entrance. And then the upper floors, the first floor essentially is flexible space with the atrium in the centre, and the toilet cores also are quite central. They sort of hug the central atrium, and that leaves as much space as flexible and open as possible, getting the benefit of the views out and the natural light coming in. Same principle for the second floor, the middle plan, the university's accommodation. On the right-hand side, the eastern wing facing into the square, the more sort of dynamic hub areas, group working areas, etc. And on the western side, the rather more private seminar rooms and offices. And at the south end, on the centre line of the building, there's a conference room, which we'll see a photograph of later. And then on the third floor, the college accommodation, which actually changed from being studios, but is still primarily top-lit with north-facing glazing. Cross-section drawings really just showing in more detail what I've described. The bottom drawing there, you can see in the centre of that long section as a backdrop to the staircase leading from first to second floor levels, very big concrete sheer wall with the porthole windows. So then we moved into more detailed elevational studies. This is the east elevation, really showing how the ground floor was kept as open and as transparent as possible. We found that we needed to have some fritting of the glazing for solar shading, and so we incorporated the major graphic symbols that were developed for the whole building into those elements. First and second floors, essentially the floor zone is expressed with a precast concrete band, and then between those bands essentially there are three options. One is it's a precast concrete panel, the second is it's just pure glazing, and the third is it's glazing with horizontal louvers in front. And then on the third floor we have anodised aluminium metal cladding with porthole windows, which are really there just to provide a little glimpse of outside, a connection with the outside, with the main natural light coming in from above. So there's a cross-section with the floor slabs are post-tensioned, and those slabs need to cantilever out for the bay windows. Those post-tensioned slabs partly designed so that we would have column-free spaces, so spanning the full 11 metres, to provide as much flexibility for the building in the future. And the soffits are exposed, so as heat builds up during the day, it can be absorbed by the concrete structure, as is very common in many buildings now. And the services are mostly distributed through a raised floor, and where they need to, they just pop down through the concrete structure to the floor below. This is a plan of the west facade, where you can see the vertical fins that I was talking about, which are expressed really as folded planes of concrete, precast concrete, which fold out from the facade to form that vertical solar shading. Being precast, obviously need to be fixed back to the in-situ slab, so that needed careful coordination. And as you can see on the plan there, the columns are circular in-situ columns inboard from the perimeter of the building. There's a cross-section through the west facade, really making the points already made. But something just to note is that there was a slight fall across the site. So we had level entrance on the public square side, which meant we could sort of dig the building into the ground by about a metre on the Elmer Avenue frontage, which just helps to reduce the scale. So then this is a detailed elevational study of the western elevation. You can see the projecting fins providing the shading, horizontal louvers then shading other windows. And we also introduced a frit for privacy, because there are a number of offices on this facade. It was felt appropriate and necessary to have some privacy by fritting the glazing. So if we go for a sort of walk around the exterior of the building, really the photographs I think are self-explanatory in illustrating the points that I've made. So this is the eastern elevation from some distance. Closer up view, and you can see pretty much in the centre of that photograph is the break in the grid with some coloured glass, and emerging from that the thin wall that sort of guides you into the entrance on that change in geometry. Another detailed photograph. As you can see, the facade has quite some depth to it through the bay windows and the projections and so on, which helps to add to its character and interest. And then this is the Elmer Avenue frontage, where I think you can see how the scale of the building is brought down on this side. At either end we have, at the far end, an extension up for the fire escape staircase and the evacuation lift, and at the near end we have the extension up for vertical ducts. So these really act almost like sort of bookends to the facade. And there's that passageway which I keep going on about with a glimpse through to the building from between the terraced houses. And there's a view of the building, the eastern facade at dusk, so you can see into the building and the colour and interest of the interior. That's probably my favourite photograph of the building, actually, because so many things are sort of captured in that image of the front entrance. This is the north end of the building, which is where the servicing is. So at the first and second floor levels there's a double height reading room, and at ground level there's the service access and also 24-hour access for the students. And then a nighttime view of the building, pretty much as I've described. You can see at the end of the building there some recessed feature lights, so those have to be integrated into the precast panels from very early on to make sure they were fully coordinated. And then this is a view from an elevated view from the university's building. So if we then move and look into the interior of the building, here we really wanted to use concrete and glass and neutral carpets as a backdrop to all the life and activity of the building. So we use coloured furniture and signage for wayfinding as the elements that bring the colour and interest to the building. One of the things we have to grapple with is the fact that we have sort of potentially 3 different users and 3 different graphic styles and so on. So we managed to reconcile that so that the building reads as a single unified building, which we thought was very important to do that. This is an early drawing of the second floor, the university's level, and then the third floor with the college. So slightly different identities, but within an overall language. And that's borne out by the photographs. So this is an illustration of the main entrance, the reception desk in the distance. And we incorporated acoustic panels in a sort of apparently random arrangement spread across the ceiling to provide sufficient acoustic absorption. So the concrete and the acoustic panels, the flooring, just quite cool background, and then colour and signage help guide people through the building. So this is the central atrium with the staircase moving up through the building. One of the reasons why the staircase sort of staggers from side to side is so that we make more of each landing level, because each of those landings, as I mentioned earlier, is in effect an entrance. So we didn't want a straight flight going up, we wanted to bring you across so you get some emphasis on the landing levels. And then there's a view of the atrium looking back down towards the entrance to the building. And another view looking down into that space from the double height reading area. And then this is a typical reading area with bookshelving and the focal point gallery on the ground floor with its changing exhibitions, another general part of the library. This is the conference room, which I mentioned earlier, the university's conference room at second floor level on the south elevation. In a way, for us, the Forum project has a number of precedents. We've done concrete buildings before, and we wanted to apply some of the sort of the lessons learned, if you like, from those projects. So one precedent, for example, is Canterbury Christ Church University Library, and for that project we used in situ concrete, but applied a Kime paint to it. And this was agreed with the client at the outset of the project. We went and looked at some other precedent projects, such as Foster's Law Library in Cambridge, where they used a Kime paint. That was the finish the client wanted. I think one of the disadvantages of doing that is that inevitably the contractor is going to take the view that it's okay, it's all going to have an applied finish at a later date, and therefore they don't need to pay quite as much attention to the quality of finish and so on, which isn't ideal. And also, I think architecturally, if you're being very sort of purist about it, why not just express the concrete for what it is rather than applying a finish to it? So whilst the university was absolutely happy, from an architectural purist point of view, we weren't quite so happy. And so the next project that we did was the Jubilee building for the University of Sussex. And externally, this picks up on a number of Basil Spence's sort of key themes, the use of bold panels of brickwork. We applied sort of flaps and fins to the elevation to control natural light, including coming in from above. But there wasn't much exposed concrete externally. There's a big slab over the entrance, and there are some retaining walls in the external landscape and paving. But most of the concrete was internal, much of it in situ, and certainly by the end of the job, the contractor had achieved a very good standard. The problem that we had was that some of the very first panels they cast were the most prominent ones right opposite the main entrance, and obviously that's a problem. And I think what it highlighted is the need for sample panels. It seems every project is slightly different. Concrete comes out just slightly differently every time, even though the ingredients might seem precisely the same. It's a bit like baking a cake, you know. You think you're following the same recipe, you're cooking it at the same temperature in the same oven, but it always comes out just slightly differently. So what we built into the contract was a requirement for samples to be provided in the interior of the electrical substation. So pieces of the feature walls, porthole recesses, sample recess sockets, board mark walls, etc., are all incorporated into the substation. I would sort of think that in 50 years' time or something, someone's going to come along and want to demolish this substation, and they're going to look in there and they're going to think, well, what's all this special concrete about? It's only a substation. But that's the reason why it was there, and some valuable lessons were learned by providing these samples. So, for example, the recess portholes, the contractor experimented with different ways of using different formwork, different materials for the formwork, and precisely when to strike the formwork, just to get that absolutely right before they were, if you like, let loose on the final building. Another point to make this photograph just makes the point that, you know, as architects, engineers, sometimes we draw just two lines to show, you know, a piece of in situ concrete work. It's all the paraphernalia that goes with that to achieve that in terms of formwork, scaffolding, reinforcement, safe access to apply the concrete and so on. So it's all the things that go with it. This is the reception wall, which was to a very good standard. But sometimes, just after concrete's being cast, it might be a wet, cold day in November, it's raining, the concrete hasn't fully dried out, and it might not look too good, and sometimes you just have to sort of stick to your guns and be confident that it's all going to be fine. because when the concrete does dry out, variations become less apparent. We had an issue with the columns, particularly with blowholes, and I mean on something like this you can be sort of quite mathematical and precise about it in terms of the specification, the diameter, maximum diameter of blowholes, how many blowholes per square metre you're going to allow. But there also needs to be a bit of qualitative judgment about it, because you don't want to make every bit of concrete perfect, because it won't look like concrete. You know, concrete does do this sort of thing, and it's part of its character. So you have to judge what you are going to make good and what you're going to leave as it is. Just a photograph of the floor slabs, post-tensioned, as I mentioned, and that enabled these wings to be flexible and column-free. And the concrete for that was about 250, 300 millimetres deep, and that provides the span that we needed. And then the soffit of the floor slabs obviously forms the finished ceiling, and this is a photograph of the final formboard layer. You can see around the top of the column, wrapped around the column, there's a plastic detail there which forms a little recess, and also going off to the right of that, a plastic former which creates a recess on the grid line. So those are little quirks, little details incorporated. But the other point to make is the contractor's got to be absolutely methodical about the cleanliness before they cast the concrete, because anything that's left on this surface is going to be part of your finished building. It's going to be cast into the concrete. So instilling in the contractor that attention to cleanliness and detail is imperative. But the result was very good. There are some ceilings there after the formwork was struck. Something else to look at very carefully, if you've got anchor bolts, these are anchor bolts to the lecture theatre walls, you need to be precise about where you want them. So we were precise about wanting them to be in the middle of the vertical board marking. It would look very odd without that, but you have got to tell the contractor that's what you want. And we were quite interested that sanding the concrete down, where there were one or two areas which needed that, did actually lead to quite significant improvement in the finish. If you do need to do repairs, it's vital that it's done to an agreed specification. You need to have an agreed written specification of how these are going to be tackled, and that the architect is notified in advance. Otherwise you can end up with some unsightly, ill-considered repairs, and then you've got even more of a problem. Photograph here which show the precast panels on the western side as those were being assembled and fixed back into the floor slabs. And then one or two drawings. Here's in effect a reflected ceiling plan which indicates exactly where we wanted the boards to be positioned. So we were quite relaxed about this in one direction. We didn't want every single joint to line up with grid lines. So running across the drawing, we were sort of relaxed about that. But going the other way, you can see the two equal indications to make sure that they're equalised across the bay. But obviously, whatever you decide, you need to be explicit at tender stage, because it makes a big difference to the price and the methodology. And similarly for things like the portholes, again, you've got to position everything you want very precisely on the elevational drawings. And similarly, if you want recesses or chamfers, you need to indicate all that on your detailed drawings. So I've talked about the precedent projects, the way in which Canterbury and Sussex, and one or two lessons learned there, led to our approach to the forum. This is a bit of an exclusive preview of a new project just going in for planning now. It's a clay farm in Cambridge, a new community facility which will provide community centre, library, doctor's surgery, rentable rooms, key worker housing, public realm and so on. And we're going to apply one or two lessons that we learned from the forum. So you're always learning lessons and always trying to improve things. So we see the forum as part of a continuum, and by no means the be-all and end-all. So there's a view of the Clay Farm Community Centre from the other side. And then just to finish with just one or two images of the forum, the main facade. that favourite view of the entrance, and then one or two nighttime shots to finish off with. So thank you very much.